Hi, everyone. This is Matt with ESI Survival Guide, an online resource designed to help legal professionals navigate the electronic wilderness. And I want to welcome you to a discussion with someone who I could not be more thrilled to have on the guide. And not only is he a computer forensics extraordinaire, but also a very close friend, someone who I've missed every single day since he left New Jersey for Atlanta. He has an amazing family. He's involved in film. He's also a Tough Mudder, Legionnaire, and so much more. But before I introduce our guests to all of you out there, let me recite our good old disclaimer. You all know the drill. The views expressed today on the guide are those of the individual interviewers and interviewees in our individual capacities only, and not those of our respective employers. I also want to direct you to the disclaimer that's located down below on the website with all the other great legal language for your reading pleasure. And if you're so inclined, please feel free to like or comment on this video. And we're coming out with new content every week on ESI Survival Guide. So it would be fantastic if you want to show your support and hit the subscribe button, as well as that notification bell to get updated when new content is posted on the guide. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce you all to Mr. Kevin Treuberg. Kevin, how are you doing, my man? How's it going? And so literally before this session, Kevin and I were talking, and there was some cell issues because Kevin's on a cellular network because the internet went down, and it was beautiful for the first 30 minutes. And I said I wasn't going to mention it, but of course, as soon as he starts to talk, the audio goes out. So let's start that again. Kevin, how are you doing?
I am doing great. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, we had a tree fell in front of our subdivision today, seeing we're all working remotely, and knocked out the internet for the area. So we'll see how it goes.
That's awesome. It's a good thing we scheduled for this day. It's kind of Murphy's Law thing, right? So
yeah, of course.
But Kevin, I'd like to give our viewers a little background on you. I always like to introduce our guests. Your background is extremely impressive. Currently, and for the past 3 years, you've served as the manager of digital forensics and eDiscovery group at Home Depot. But throughout your career, you've really had a lot of experience from almost every major corner of the forensics industry, or that industry touches. You've worked at Big Law with major consulting and accounting companies, in the financial services and insurance industry with companies like CNA Financial and AIG. You've been a cyber forensic examiner with the Department of Energy, and you started your career as a counterintelligence special agent with the U.S. Army. If you could, give me a quick overview. What was it like being in the Army, being a counterintelligence special agent?
Well, it was interesting. I thought it was the best job in the military, being a special agent, doing force protection type of investigations. I was in for about 7 years, a little over 7 years, but it wasn't until the last 2 years that I got involved in information warfare and computer forensics and network intrusion investigations. The prior 5 years was all wearing the tree suit, going out and deploying into the field, doing low-level source operations and force protection work. So that was quite rewarding. A lot of grunt time, carrying a pack. 10th Mountain Division light infantry is anything but light. Everything's on your back. But I can say that the last 2 years of it, in a more strategic position, doing those targeted investigations like network intrusion that are coming from a foreign government into our U.S. Army systems, was pretty exciting.
You've worked in almost every major area where cyber threats are a daily concern, which dovetails right into the main topic I want to talk about today, which is ransomware and some of those cyber threats. But so even before you were in the Army, was dealing in this type of industry, forensics, computers, technology, was that something you were always interested in, or did that come about while you were in military service?
That was definitely a result of being in the military. I joined the military wanting to do more intelligence type work and doing that intelligence work for a little over 7 years. The last 2 years, I just kind of fell into the computer forensics and the information warfare field. It was my last duty station. We had an opportunity to go and do more of a counterintelligence deep career track or go into the cyber field. And I'm happy I chose the cyber field. I mean, it's been booming since 2000 when I got out of the military.
Sure.
And definitely the focus has shifted a lot from regular standalone forensics to eDiscovery and then now to cybersecurity. There's a lot of work out there. There's a lot of threats out there. So having more people trained, especially in cybersecurity and these tactics, is a boon for any company.
One of the main things I love about this business is how all these different individuals have come into it through really unique avenues. It's almost like no two people have approached or gotten involved in this industry in the same way. I came from the music industry. You came from the military. So very, very similar right there. I feel like I've put in the same amount of stress and time as you have coming from the music.
Same.
And one thing I also wanted to note for the viewers is, you have a whole litany of certifications and licenses. One is that I noticed recently you received your Insider Threat Program Manager certificate from Carnegie Mellon University, and that was this past September. So kudos on using your time during the lockdown effectively. I learned how to screw up a cake trying to learn how to bake, and you got an amazing cert. So again, I feel like we're kind of on the same path.
Well, I not only got the cert, I got an Instapot too. So I'm not only doing Insider Threat, I'm blowing things up in the kitchen. So
we literally made corned beef in the Instapot last night. So there we go. But let's just jump right in. I want to start off by diving into two major trends that are very intertwined. The first is the rise in ransomware. It seems to be just something that's a given now in today's technology landscape, but also how the threat landscape has changed during COVID. So first, one of the most concerning widespread trends in 2020 moving into 2021 is this widespread growth in ransomware. It seems like it cooled down a little bit over the holidays, but definitely these attacks have been increasing. Just to give the viewers a couple of statistics and some background, the New York Times reported that ransomware attacks had increased by 41% from 2018 to 2019, with other reports claiming that almost 188 million ransomware attacks had happened during the same period. And then there's a report, Bitdefender threat report, which comes along and has claimed that there's a 7-fold increase in ransomware campaigns in their mid-2020 report, and then that's only increasing. Cybersecurity Ventures, they reported that a company was attacked every 11 seconds in 2020, and they project that the cost related to ransomware attacks will be upwards of 20 billion in 2021. So a very scary trend, one that is quite staggering. The one ransomware attack that really stood out for me was that attack that happened on a New York entertainment law firm in 2020, where a whole bunch of celebrity data was taken. I think they wanted $21 million. And when they were lowballed or weren't paid out, they then upped that to 42 million, especially because I think they also claimed that they had Trump information, which was important at the time. Still might be important now with all the lawsuits coming out. But we're seeing, these cyber gangs emerging and working together, often in really kind of uncentralized manners, where one group builds the code, then they might license this code out to affiliate criminals for a cut of the take. And there's been some recent arrests, but it seems like they haven't really been putting a dent in the bad actors. So my first question, what do you think is behind this big rise in ransomware? I mean, outside of just the tech, why is this happening now?
Well, I think, ransomware has been around for several years. I think just is getting more and more press now, number one, because more folks are doing it. You're right, it's increasing. The percentage rate is increasing of these companies getting hit with ransomware, or at least people probing and trying to install the ransomware. But it's easy. It's incredibly easy. Like you said, you have a lot of people writing this code. You have a lot of people writing the actual programs and applications. And then they just want their percentage of what the take is, if there is a take, right? I've seen it in past lives, working on some consulting contracts, seeing some of these ransomware, some of these folks getting hit with ransomware, and they're in conversations with the folks to pay them, and they want to have kind of like a sample of the key, right? So they can give them a sample of the data back just so they can make sure that the key that they're being provided and they're paying for is working, and then it doesn't work. Some of these folks that are deploying this ransomware might not even have the key to unlock your data. So these negotiations and paying in Bitcoin or some other type of cryptocurrency, you just might lose your shirt and not even get your data back.
Oh, wow.
Right. So yeah, it's scary. I mean, the statistics that you were talking about, a lot of it is also just the reported victims of ransomware. You may have some folks that do get hit and they do pay, and maybe they do get their data unlocked, right? Because their data and their reputational damage and the hits to their brands are certainly worth the price to try to pay to pay for this ransomware key.
I'd like to see that statistic too, that shows what percentage of these bad actors take someone's data for ransom and don't have a key. Like there's never any way they're ever going to get it back. And I assume what that does is that just makes it even more exigent for there to be a solution to this. But it seems like there really hasn't been a clear-cut way to easily handle this. You always hear that scary comments, not about if you're going to get attacked, but when. Right. So it's definitely interesting to see how the solutions progress over time. But one of the things we do on the guide, Kevin, is it's for experts and neophytes, beginners, if you will, alike. So just to give a few definitions in the context of cyber, what is a threat? What does risk mean? What is a vulnerability? What are some of these different terms that you use in this space?
Sure. So you can interchange information security or IT security with cybersecurity, right? Those can be the same, depending on the organization that you're talking to or working with. When you're talking about the threat, right? So the threat can be those threat actors. It can be those organizations that are trying to do those phishing or spear phishing campaigns against you, trying to exploit potential code that might be on your outwardly facing systems so they can gain access into your network. The threat is pretty much those advanced persistent threats, those bad actors that are trying to get entrance into your network in an effort to just poke around, in an effort to, hey, we're a good organization, we're just kind of pointing out the security threats for you or doing some bug bounties. Or there can be folks that are just trying to get a foothold into your network, crawl around, try to take as much data as they can. And when they're done with you, then that's when they release that ransomware, right? So that's the threat actors can come in kind of different flavors, right? And then we talk about risk. The way I see it when we talk about risk, the number one, in my opinion, deterrent for ransomware is education, right? Education on all of your staff or education on your clients from a cybersecurity perspective, right? You want to make sure that folks aren't double clicking on certain attachments. They're not going to unknown websites. They're not clicking links that they don't know who they're coming from. And that's how potentially a lot of this stuff can get into your network. So you're trying to mitigate that risk, right? So by having a good education program, you're really going to start cutting down on that risk that you're going to be experiencing. And then the vulnerability is if you have folks that are coming after your domain or trying to probe your outside facing web servers or database servers or what have you, there can be that vulnerability in that server that they can exploit, right? Because that can be something that might not have been patched properly or not even patched at all. There could have been an alert that had gone out to say that this type of server is vulnerable to this type of attack. And what they're doing is some of these threat actors, they're just combing through the internet and they're looking for these certain servers that have these vulnerabilities in them, irregardless of what industry you're in. If you're in tech, if you're government, if you're education, if you're retail, they don't care. They're just looking for an opening to get in and try to capture some data from them.
So it sounds like there's a lot of interchangeability then, like you said before. So like a bad actor, or not even a bad actor, but let's say a negligent actor. Like I have a company and I have uneducated employees and I'm not giving them the proper training with regards to how to handle some of these things, not double click on links and things of this nature. Sure. Are those uneducated employees, will they be considered a threat? Or again, does that fall more into and identified as a vulnerability? Or is it both? So there's different ways to look at it, right? If you're looking at it from like an insider threat perspective, right? So that's an unintentional disclosure of information, right? If someone's not educated and they're clicking on a link and they're not intending to be the threat, they're not intending to release company data or have somebody come in and get a foothold, that's where your education comes in, right? If you're looking at this type of threat from the outside, right? So say you're a threat actor and you're looking at an organization, you're going to look for the different vulnerabilities that are on those networks or that are on those servers and try to expose and get that foothold to get into the organization. It sounds like when you're assessing the full threat landscape, there's so many different vectors and factors that go into it in terms of outside, inside, human, technology. With regards to industry, there was a 2020 IBM X-Force report that showed that the manufacturing industry was often hit hardest by ransomware, followed by professional services companies, then government organizations. But with the COVID pandemic, you're seeing a rise in attacks on educational institutions, as well as healthcare institutions. Just this past October, the FBI, the CISA, and the Department of Health and Human Services released an advisory regarding an imminent cybercrime threat to hospitals and healthcare providers. So it seems that covers almost every industry. But what makes one industry sector more vulnerable than the next?
I think it's a couple things. There's first is the data that sector or that corporation, the data that they have, is that what the attackers want? Is it lucrative data like PII? So is it personally identifiable information where they can collect that data and then do identity theft? Or collect PCI data, credit card information, right? So they can scoop up all those different credit card numbers and then sell those on the dark web so they can kind of get a cut and get some of that money and recoup some of that loss. And then there's also on the industry itself. Are those different types of industries, are they sophisticated enough to hire and maintain an adequate cybersecurity or IT security infrastructure, right? I mean, we see a lot of, on the educational space, they might not get enough funding to do that type of work. But then when you look at the Fortune 100, Fortune 200 companies, they're going to have a more robust cybersecurity infrastructure, right, to protect all of their data. So it all depends on those two factors. I think there's the data that they're looking for, the data that they want, and then how easy of a target are they because they're not patching all of their systems or they don't have a proper intrusion detection system or any endpoint security on their systems. I think it's kind of it's a mix of both of those things.
And it's interesting too, because it seems like big corporations with big C-suites and high profile boards would be the obvious target. But like you said, those large corporations also have the highest amount of investment in intrusion protection and defense mechanisms for these types of attacks. So you wonder that in the press, you often hear about these big name corporations that get hit, but it's probably a lot of the smaller corporations that are targeted that may go under the radar. So again, that goes to the fact that this might be a much more prevalent issue than we all realize, just reading the press. But from a practical standpoint, if I am that small company, if I don't have the necessary controls in place and I get hit with a ransomware attack, first off, can you tell me, what does it actually look like? I'm assuming you haven't been hit personally and professionally with one, but I'm assuming that you know what it looks like. Does my computer just shut down? Do I get a notice? Do I get something on another device? What does it look like? And then what are some of your tips? What are your top 3 survival tips? What do I immediately do once I realize I've been the victim of a ransomware attack?
Sure. So it was when I was a consultant. It wasn't when I was with my current employer where we ran into a ransomware attack. One of our clients had ransomware hit their systems. And it did. It pretty much locked all the systems, shut them down. When the folks were logging in, they would see a warning banner on their screen that said, you have been affected by the Royal ransomware or whatever type of ransomware. And there would be instructions on how to contact these folks to give them money so they can give you the key back, right? It has a potential to crawl through your entire network, to encrypt all of your systems, and to cripple even your backups if they're connected. So it's very nasty stuff. I mean, you see a lot of these incredibly tactical and dedicated threat actors where they won't just unleash the ransomware right away. They'll gain access to your network. They'll navigate around and they'll collect whatever the data they can, whatever they think is valuable to them or to you. And once they've gotten all they can take, and then they release the ransomware, right? So they're telling you, hey, we've collected all of your data. We've encrypted everything in place. But we've also got some of your data that we're going to release on the dark web. Brand reputation. Some of these law firms, like you said, might have some really, really incredibly sensitive client data. It can be really bad for a company, PR-wise, right? And then reputational damage-wise to recover for some of that stuff.
Especially with a law firm too, it's because with law firm clients, it seems like that would be a prime target because traditionally, you don't think of law firms as being heavily invested in data security. That's changing now. It's an upward trend. But I would imagine just based on the client profile that law firms have and the types of matters that they handle, law firms would be a prime target for this type of thing.
Right. And what was a good outcome from that client I was telling you about, this scenario I was working with, where they had experienced all that ransomware. It happened about 6 months prior. That client is how we got involved with them initially. That client had been raided by the FBI, and we had to collect all of their systems in an effort to preserve it for litigation. You fast forward 6 or 8 months, and they said, we've been hit by ransomware. Do you guys happen to have all of our data still? So luckily we did. So we're able to make them whole as of 6 months prior to the ransomware. So they were able to get back up on their feet relatively quickly. albeit losing 6 months of work product and data. But for them, that was a good outcome where they didn't necessarily have to pay that ransomware. But a lot of companies aren't so fortunate. Either they have to suck it up and pay that fee, and hopefully they're going to get that key, or they're sunk.
Is the way that you can try and attack the attackers is by tracing the mechanisms they use to collect the money? Is that possible? Or with cryptocurrency and decentralized currency like that, is that almost impossible these days?
Yeah, that's going to be difficult unless you're a government organization that has subpoena powers to kind of really start crawling through and getting access to the logs where all this data is going through. As an individual consumer, it's going to be very difficult.
So, Kevin, what can an individual do aside from just contacting the authorities? If I, God forbid, am a victim of ransomware, what's some of the first things I should be thinking about?
Maybe I think the best way to answer that is kind of take a step back, right? So what are the things that you should do to try to prevent it first? And then maybe it can kind of help mitigate what your response would be, once if you get hit with it, right? So obviously education, right? Don't click on any emails from folks that you don't know, links, documents. If it's leading you to unknown websites, always be careful of that. Don't pick up thumb drives that you find in a parking lot at the mall and plug them in your computer.
Wait, what? I'm not supposed to do that?
Oh, no.
So I gotta get rid of this thing.
Common sense stuff, right? But what are you going to do when it happens? So I guess that's different for the different level that you're getting hit, right? So if you're an individual, obviously you want to cut your internet access off, right? You don't want to have any more issues going on with that. If you're a corporation, you obviously want to engage your incident response teams, and there's going to be some kind of maybe corporate level incident response that involves not only your cybersecurity or IT security folks, it's going to involve your legal team, your corporate security teams, a core incident response management team. So there's going to be all kinds of public relations and communications. There's going to be all kinds of folks that are involved in these types of things. And then if you don't have a robust internal cybersecurity group, you have to go find yourself someone that can help you out, engaging consultants, engaging outside cybersecurity firms, or even if you are farming out your cybersecurity work to an outside organization, maybe you have a ton of your servers and your data is in the cloud and folks are managing it that way for you. Those would be the folks that you're going to have to engage to get this cleaned up and help you out. It's different for every situation, unfortunately, but I think as an individual, a way to prevent some of this and at least to kind of bounce back and recover quickly is keeping offline backups or keeping backups of your data in a separate type of cloud location or cloud account, right? Other consumer accounts to keep that data there so you can replicate and then hopefully quickly reconstitute what you were doing over the past few days so you can kind of carry on and drive on with your business.
That's a really good point. So a ransomware attack that's designed simply to lock up your data so you can't engage in your day-to-day activities, of having that offline backup is definitely a good point. I assume that doesn't play out as well for somebody who might have sensitive data, embarrassing data, or things they're trying to hide on their laptop. Sure. Might be a different type of issue. But once that data is encrypted at rest, those bad actors, they have it. Even if you were disconnect your internet, shut off your computer, change your computer, they have that information, even if it's at rest, quote unquote. Is that correct? They have now a possession of that information?
Well, they might not necessarily possess it. They might encrypt it at rest on your own systems. It's just you cannot gain access to it. And what they're doing is they're just asking money for the key, right? So you might still have that data in your possession. All of your systems might be locked up. And they might not have any of that data. You hope they don't, right? Have some of your sensitive data, but the majority of it could be encrypted in place. And one thing you have to be aware about backups too is you have to be very cognizant of the timeline of this stuff, because if you're doing incremental backups or systematic backups and you're preserving your data over a certain cadence or schedule of time, you don't want to restore data that might have that ransomware executable software in it. Right. You want to make sure that you can, in your best efforts, to identify when some of this occurred and how it occurred. And then when you're backing or restoring a backup or reconstituting your data, you're not starting all over again with it, right? Because you have ransomware in there.
So feasibly, you could pay the ransom, get the key, and then go through a backup effort and kind of reinitialize that software
I'm sure stranger things have happened. I'm sure.
I can imagine you having to go back to the gang and be like, hey guys, can I get that key again? Is it a different one?
or even going back to your management, your board, and saying, yeah, I need another $100 million bucks. So
yeah.
Back.
Remember that beating we just took in the press? Yeah, it's you guys haven't read the papers today, have you? Hopefully not. but yeah.